This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored in part by Allison Cook and Super Inframan. Help us out by becoming a patron at wheredidtheroadgo.com.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And I have returning with me Mr. Steve Stockton. Hey, Steve.
Hey there, Soraya. How you doing?
It has been a while since you've been on.
Yeah, it's been a couple of years, I think.
And you have a couple new books out. We're going to talk about one of these. National Park Mysteries and Disappearances, The Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And when did this come out?
That one came out last year, I believe. It all kind of runs together after a while. 2021. So technically this year. I wrote it last year, though, most of it. That's a new series I started. That's volume 1. I chose that one to write about first because, number one, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park is the most visited national park in the country. Even in 2020, with everything that was going on, it still saw 12 million visitors, while the nearest second place was Yosemite with single-digit millions. I think it had 5 or 6 million.
Damn.
And also, I grew up in the area, grew up in East Tennessee, and my mom's side of the family are actually from the Cades Cove area of the park. That's where they landed after immigrating over from Europe.
Okay. And this, as you said, this is a series you're going to be doing. You have a second one out that we're not going to talk about tonight called what?
It's volume 2 is California. It covers specifically Yosemite, Joshua Tree, and Mount Shasta.
I'm really glad you threw Mount Shasta in there. I'm looking forward to reading that one.
Strange place. I've been there, and it's just all the stories are true.
Well, let's talk about Cades Cove. And you said you grew up around this area in Cades Cove. Where is it in the Appalachians?
Cades Cove is inside the national park. I actually grew up in the Knoxville and Oak Ridge area, which is about an hour or so away. But it's one of the most favorite places for people to go in the park. There's an 11-mile loop there that's very popular, especially in the fall with all the foliage and stuff there when the fall colors come in. Certain days of the week it's closed to automobiles and people take their bikes and things through there. But it's just a nice leisurely drive through the Smokies there. You can see the mountains, you can see bear and deer and things like that. And they've left a lot of the old structures are still there. There's some barns and homesteads and things like that. There's some really old graveyards in there. I've gone up there and found where my relatives are buried. And it's a beautiful place, a bucolic place, but it's got a dark side too, just with all the hauntings and things that go on there. A lot of strange occurrences in Cades Cove. There's certain places that just can't be photographed, or if you do photograph them, the pictures don't come out exactly right.
So when you say they can't be photographed, what happens?
It either doesn't appear on the film, or it blurs out, or there'll be some sort of strange anomaly in there. And I've seen it happen with regular film and like with Polaroids and things like that, and with digital cameras. There's a picture of my brother standing outside of one of those cabins, and there's somebody standing behind him that would have had to be about 8 feet tall. And in the next frame, because my sister-in-law took a couple of shots of him, there's nothing there. And there's the way he's standing, he's right up against the house, standing next to the chimney. And there wouldn't have been room for anybody to stand behind him, but yet there's this strange-looking man dressed in black, a really tall person standing right behind my brother.
Was it like a shadow looking like, or were there features?
It looked like a person. There were features that you could see. My brother was a pastor, and he believes it's his guardian angel. So who knows? But interesting nonetheless. And just stuff like that seems to be common there.
And you said there are pictures. Did you say that people will take pictures and there'll be buildings that don't exist on it?
Yeah, that happens too. Either you take a picture of something and it doesn't show up, or in other pictures, there's been log structures and things that appeared in the photo in one frame and then they're not there in the next. Stuff that was probably there centuries ago or 100, 200 years ago anyway.
I mean, that sounds like there's something environmental that's messing with everything.
Yeah, well, that's basically the whole Smokies. There's just something there about the place. The Cherokee knew about it, and there's geomagnetic anomalies and things there, too. There's places on the trails there, Soraya, that where the Park Service has put up a warning sign that don't trust your GPS or compass in this area because it may give you false readings.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Huh. So what other type of stuff do you see in Cades Cove? You said there's haunting, too.
Yeah, that and the North Shore of Fontana Lake are probably the two areas in the Smokies that have had the most hauntings or paranormal activity there. Technically, it closes at dusk or at sunset, but there are people that go in there anyway on foot. And there's been everything you can imagine, ghosts of animals, ghosts of people. There's a ubiquitous lady in white. I think any community down south, there's going to be a lady in white. The only thing that's not there, at least that I'm not aware of, that's prevalent in the south is a crybaby bridge. Every little community seems to have one of those, and there's probably one nearby there in Ramsey or Townsend or somewhere.
Right, and obviously there's Sasquatch sightings.
Yeah, there are what I believe to be Sasquatch. Now, there are people, especially people that live there in the mountains near the park. Nobody technically lives in the park now. They're not supposed to. But there's stories of wild feral people that lived in the park that are also cannibals. There's a guy with a YouTube channel called South Force 10, and he claims that back in the 30s, before the park's inception, some of his relatives were actually hired by the government to go in and hunt these people and help thin them out. And then there's also a theory that that's why the park is where it is. It sits almost equally on the border with eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina, that supposedly, now according to some people, it's there to keep those people in there and away from people. That if they keep them in the park and don't let them outside, then they won't eat any people in nearby Sevierville or Pigeon Forge. You know, there's a lot of attractions up there. Dollywood and things like that is up there.
Right, right.
So, but it's definitely not good for tourism if you've got feral cannibals in the woods. So, like, if true, I understand why they would keep it quiet.
The latest Wrong Turn movie kind of took that idea, but they had a breakaway civilization in the woods there. I think it was in the Smoky Mountains. I could be wrong, but somewhere like that.
Yeah, there's been rumors there for years, even before the national park came in, that there were just wild hillbillies that would eat you.
That's weird. To think that could still exist today, you know?
Yeah. Well, if you go into the park, you can see how, I mean, it's just, there are places in there that you can get far enough back that I don't think maybe anybody has ever set foot on, except maybe the Cherokee, and there's places there that they don't even go. And for example, you had Eric Rudolph, the guy that was bombing the abortion clinics and stuff. When he was on the FBI's most wanted list, he went in the Nantahala National Forest, which is farther south from the Smokies, but a part of the same region there. He was able to hide out there for a few years. And the only way they caught him, he started sneaking into a little town there in North Carolina and getting stuff out of the dumpster at a grocery store. And he was a little late one morning, and I think the store was already open, and a rookie policeman was in there getting coffee and recognized him from the wanted poster. So it is possible to go in there and not be found if you don't want to be found. And there's a lot of strange disappearances from there, too. Some predating modern times and myths and legends and things, but one of the most modern or most talked about modern stories is the disappearance of Dennis Martin.
Yeah.
Little boy that disappeared on Father's Day in 1969. He was up there with his father and brother and grandfather, and had been in Cades Cove and then hiked up to a place called Spence Field, and that was where he disappeared from. And there's never any trace of him found, and that's one of the rumors that the cannibals caught him and ate him.
I remember Micah Hanks talking about a ginseng hunter in the last few years, maybe the last 10, 15 years, had found a skull that they thought might have belonged to Dennis, but I don't know whatever happened to that.
Yeah, he placed it in a hollow stump.
Yeah,
with plans to go back because he didn't want to get in trouble for ginseng hunting. It's a federal offense to hunt it in the national park. And
how come?
It's just one of those things. It's a protected species. It's high in demand. It's worth a lot. Literally, the dried roots are worth their weight in gold.
Gotcha.
And there's places in the Smokies where it grows wild and abundantly. And I guess that's the main thing. They don't want people in there digging stuff up, but it happens anyway. There are ginseng poachers and things in there, and that's what the guy was doing. He was in there hunting sang, as they call it down south, and found a skull that he thought might be Dennis Martin's, and then he put it in a tree stump. And when he finally got the guilties bad enough to tell somebody about it and figured out that he wouldn't get in trouble for poaching, went back to retrieve it, and it was gone. But it was a child's skull, according to him. So could have been Dennis. It was near the area where he went missing.
And aren't there also a lot of caves or mines through there?
A lot of caves. The whole area, in East Tennessee in particular, is just full of limestone caverns. And it's part of a bigger system that runs all the way up into Kentucky with Mammoth Cave and some of those caves up there. If you've watched Hellier and some of those shows, that's the same set of caves, just in different locations.
Right. And yeah, I know his disappearance is weird because he disappeared so quickly, and they had, as you put it, the largest manhunt in history looking for him.
Yeah, at that time, that was the largest search and rescue effort in the Smokies. And that one just always kind of stuck with me. I wrote about it extensively in the book there. I was just a few months younger than Dennis when that happened. I think he was 6 going on 7, and I was 5 going on 6. I think I've got that right. And it's the first time, just in my kid mind, that, I figured out that, bad things can happen to kids. There are kids that can go missing and never show back up. So I followed that case really since day one. Knoxville had 2 papers at the time, the Knoxville News Sentinel, which was the evening paper, and the Knoxville Journal, which was the morning paper through the week. And somewhere, it's probably at my brother's house after my parents passed away, but I've got a couple of scrapbooks that I filled up as a kid with clippings about Dennis Martin. And in my kid-like mind, we only lived about an hour away from the Smokies, and I thought, well, maybe he wandered down here where we live. So I'm out on these little country roads where we lived out in the country, and on my Schwinn Stingray, riding along, looking in the bushes to see if I see a missing kid. So just one of those that stuck with me. But yeah, he's it's going on 52 years now, I think. His father passed away a few years ago on Halloween, no less, and just never had any closure. And a lot of times around the anniversary of Dennis's disappearance, the local TV stations would trot out a thing and do a special about it. And he wouldn't talk too much with the news. He felt like they and the FBI betrayed him because they hid stuff from him when it initially happened. But I saw an interview with him one time, poor guy, and he was just like, I think I'm going to be sitting here one day and I'm going to hear a knock at the door. I'm going to go to the door. There's going to be a handsome looking man there. And like, yes, can I help you? And he's going to say, Dad, it's me. It's Dennis. I've come home. But sadly, never happened.
Yeah. And the stuff they hid from him was the fact that someone saw what looked to be a wild man.
First they thought it was a bear. It was the Key family. I think it was a man, his wife, and 2 kids, I believe. They'd ask a ranger where they might be able to see some bear, and he'd point them in a direction. And while they're in there looking for bear, they heard what they said the most sickening, blood-curdling scream they'd ever heard in their life. And when they looked up, one of the kids is like, "Hey, there goes a bear now." And the dad said, "That's not a bear. That's like a hairy man or a man wearing animal cloths or something." And he was carrying something red over his shoulder. Well, Dennis was wearing a red sweater or red shirt that day. But according to the FBI, the distance that happened was far enough from Spence Field that Dennis couldn't have possibly walked that far. But if somebody had nabbed him and ran down there, that's because that was what his father and Dwight McCarter, who was a National Park Service employee, was the lead tracker at that time on the Dennis Martin case. He's retired now. He wrote a really good book called Lost about disappearances in the Smokies. They actually pasted out and tried it, and they found that indeed they believe an adult could have made it, maybe if they were carrying a small child. But that was just one thing that they kept from him. There was some other stuff like that, and the FBI agent that was in charge of the investigation in the Knoxville field office went on to commit suicide under rather strange circumstances. There was a nightclub on Kingston Pike in Knoxville called Cades, a dance club. I've been there before years and years ago. One evening, he walks into the club, goes out to the middle of the dance floor, puts a gun in his mouth, and ends his life. So that's no suicide, no anything. Just and what a strange place to do it.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. That is weird.
And some people think that it was because he knew what had happened to Dennis. As far as now, this is according to the guy I was telling you about, the South Force 10 YouTube channel, that the FBI agent knew that these feral cannibal people, humanoids, whatever they are, had taken Dennis and eaten him.
I'd like to know why he thinks that.
He's, other than what he claims that his relatives have talked about, that's really all he says about it. He's got a whole series on there. There's like at least 4 videos he's made about specifically Dennis Martin. They're worth a watch. I mean, it is the one story that I've heard that neatly ties the whole case together. If there were people living in there, whether they ate him or not, remains to be seen. But just if these people that live, even if it was just normal people that choose to live off grid in the mountains, if they took him, that would explain everything. Why nothing was ever found, why the dogs couldn't detect the scent. Remains to be seen what they did with him. If they didn't eat him, I mean, they could have kept him and raised him as one of their own. Who knows? But there's also people that alludes to the hairy man being a Bigfoot or Sasquatch type creature too, because there's Cherokee legends of same in the area.
And totally lost my train of thought there. Yep, I don't know where I was going with that. There was another thing about Dennis Martin's disappearance. Oh, the fact that the weather turned bad, of course, also impaired any kind of searching for him.
Yeah, and that happens. That's a weird synchronicity with a lot of these missing person cases, not just in the Smokies, but all over the country and probably the world. When these people go missing under mysterious circumstances, there's always an unexpected change in the weather that just seems to come out of nowhere, where there's a heavy rainfall or heavy snow or high winds. Something odd will happen with the weather, almost like there's something supernatural or preternatural or something afoot there. And that's one thing I found delving into these stories and talking about them on my YouTube channel. There seems to, not all the cases, but in a lot of the cases, there seems to be almost some sort of paranormal or supernatural element where people are lost and are later found deceased in areas that had previously been searched, sometimes several times. And they find people that have been missing for maybe 2 or 3 months, but the coroner, the medical examiner, says that they've only been dead a week or so.
Yeah.
So where were they the rest of that time? And another strange thing that's happened is boulder fields. A lot of times people are found dead in boulder fields.
Yep.
And they tend to look like they've fallen from a considerable height, like something picked them up into the air, then dropped them, and they went splat on the rocks. But there's also Native American legends and the Algonquins in the New England area have one of the most infamous ones, that there are creatures that can disguise themselves as rocks. And when people pass by, they can open up and swallow the person, and then they close up and crush them. And I don't know if they get sustenance from them or what, but then they spit them back out. And if you think about that, if something like a rock could open up, swallow you, crush you, spit you out, you might look like you'd fallen from a considerable height.
That's
because
true.
nobody's thinking came out of a rock.
Yeah, because I've never even heard that legend before. I don't think that's really interesting.
Freaky, yeah. And there's another man that they found. I think this was back in the 20s or 30s or something in what they call the Bennington Triangle around Bennington, Vermont, that had gone missing. They found him in the woods on a trail, and he looked like he had been squeezed to death. They said so. But it's not just limited to any one area. I mean, it's all the way up to the eastern coast, and then a lot on the west coast. And there's some places, there's like right down the middle of the country, there's not that many strange disappearances. And I've seen some people, David Paulides has these cluster maps where he's laid out where these clusters of missing people are. Well, somebody on Facebook, and I think I also saw it on YouTube, had taken a geological, like a USGS map of where all the cave systems are in the country, and overlaid it with that map. And the same areas with the highest concentrations of not only caves, but limestone caves in particular, and limestone deposits are the same. It matches up to where these clusters of missing people are. So is it something in the caves? Is it something underground? I mean, you're running into some really high strangeness territory here with, like Darrows and Lemuria and some of the stuff they talk about on Mount Shasta, which is another place a lot of people have gone missing unexpectedly and then either not found, or there are some people that are found and either don't remember what happened or they just refuse to talk about it.
Yeah.
A lot of the missing are children who don't remember. And there's been several cases of a child who said either a big dog or a bear took their hand and took them back to a cave or a safe place, fed them berries, and kept them warm at night until they were found. Well, you and I both know that dogs or bears don't hold hands with children or pick berries or cuddle up with them. That leads me to believe that those instances are Bigfoot or Sasquatch or something similar to that, and the kid, without any knowledge of anything like that, it just assumes it's a dog or a bear or whatever they can think of. That
was the case with the disappearance a couple of years ago. Casey, I can't remember his last name, but down in North Carolina, where he disappeared and he was gone for like 2 or 3 days, and it was below, freezing out, and he was found unharmed. And Hathaway, I think it was Casey Hathaway.
Yeah, Casey Hathaway, I believe you're right.
Yeah, and he said a bear took care of him, and it's like, okay, well, that's probably not actually what happened. I wonder what that bear was,
But, and people are so willing, the skeptics are so willing to accept that, oh, okay, it was a bear, move along, nothing to see here. Bears don't behave that way.
I mean, there might be an odd chance that maybe one would. I mean, who knows?
It's not above the realm of possibility. Say a mother bear had lost a cub or something, and she might think that a human is a naked bear cub, or without any fur or anything, and take care. Because I've heard of cases like that, where a cat would take care of a duck, or a goat would make friends with a dog, or something like that. So it happens, but it would be highly improbable.
Especially to have happened numerous times.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's just another one of those strange things that pops up in there. People that go missing tend to be wearing red.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it will be the first one in line or the last one in line if you're traveling in a group. That's why they tell you to always stay with your group. It's usually somebody that's either the group's gone on ahead, or the person went ahead of the group and then they're never seen again. So it's like whatever it is that's taking people, if it is indeed something taking them, it singles them out and, separate them from the herd and then strike.
And that makes sense. I mean, that you would be the first or last because those are the most likely to be isolated.
Yeah, I've never heard of anybody going missing while they were together in a group. It's always somebody that forgot, something in the car, and I'm going to run back and get this, and then they never see him again. Or the only one kind of similar to that is there was a gentleman that disappeared from a bus in the Burlington Triangle or the Bennington Triangle area. People remembered him getting on the bus. Nobody ever saw him get off. And then when it pulled into whatever little town it was, his stuff was still there and he wasn't there. And that one was kind of strange. They never found him, no trace of him.
And I don't think there's any one explanation for these disappearances either. I think there's a multitude of things going on.
I think there's several. I think it could be a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch type creature. I think serial killers are responsible for part of it. On the book I'm working on now, I covered a case in Idaho where, I think it's Idaho, it might have been Oregon. I get them mixed up. I'm covering Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. But a guy back in the 70s had just gotten out on parole and then came across a family that was camping and killed the whole family. And then later on found out he was guilty of several other murders and things. So just, a thrill killer. So I think that happens, just, crime of opportunity, somebody out in the woods. Even the FBI speculated that there was one or more serial killers at work along the Appalachian Trail, which would be a perfect hunting ground. I mean, it runs all the way from Georgia, at the terminus there, all the way up into Maine.
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of ground you could cover. There's all kinds of little towns right off the Appalachian Trail. And if you knew your way, through the woods, you could hide even on the trail. Now, there are trail angels and people like that help the hikers, and everybody has a trail name. And it's a community that sort of knows one another, especially with the thru hikers and things like that. But it could even be one of them. Who knows? I mean, they're serial killers are just like everybody else.
I remember there was a story we covered about this woman who was she jogging or hiking or something. She was with her dog. She stopped to use a restroom on one of the trail stops. And this guy came in there and attacked her. Mm-hmm. And she got away from him and she took off into the woods. And she ended up being a missing person. And and it fit so many of Politis' things where like the dog came back. She was a seasoned hunter or a seasoned hiker. She had been in the area plenty of times. No one could find her. They were apparently ended up searching in the wrong place, and she did eventually find her way back, which is the only reason we know what happened to her. But if she had not found her way back, she would have just been one of those mysterious disappearances. But the cause of the disappearance was someone tried to kill her or rape her. Yeah. I think he said he was going to rape her and then kill her is what he said, and she managed to get away from him.
Wow. Yeah, either one of those in any order would not be a good thing.
Yes, exactly. So,
there are human predators out there.
Yeah.
There are animal predation. I mean, there are big cat attacks and things like that. And a lot of people try to claim that or go to that first. Oh, well, a big cat got them. Well, if a cat or an animal, a bear, anything like that gets you, there's going to be a sign of a struggle. There's going to be blood and forensic evidence. They won't eat your clothing and things like that, although they might get pieces of it. A lot of times when they're looking for a missing person, they will examine animal scat in the area to see if there's any fibers or hair or anything in there like that. But bear tend to cache their kills in the bush, and big cats put theirs up in trees. So, but then you have people that are found totally decomposed, but there's no marks on their bones. Yeah. And so, if a cat or a bear or something like that gnaws on you, it's going to leave marks.
There's also an animal, is it one of the cats that actually will bury their prey under roots? Mm-hmm. Because someone put a video up of them doing this. And that was one of the things that Politis was finding, is some of these people were found in like roots of trees. And that very well could be what I can't remember.
Yeah.
I want to say it's one of the cats.
I know what you're talking about. It's unusual for a cat to do that, but apparently it does happen. But yeah, some of those, Sarai, they found them like growing under tree roots, like several inches under the root, like the tree had grown over them, but they obviously hadn't been in the ground that long.
Right. Yes.
And what else? People, that disappear tend to either be somewhere on the functioning autism side of things, or extremely smart, like PhDs and doctors and things like that. They tend to be in good health, like athletes, like runners and climbers and things like that.
Or disabled.
Or disabled, like either end of the spectrum, but not so much in the middle.
And the disabled side of the spectrum, not so much disabled, because you think, how far are you going to go if you're disabled? But if someone is like on the autism spectrum or something, and, if that's affecting them enough, they may wander off, and that may explain that, but that doesn't explain most of it.
Yeah, and especially with how far some of the people are found from where they disappeared. There was one case I covered of a child, I think he's around 2 years old, that was found, I think like 12 miles away.
Right.
But he would have had to go up a mountain, down the other side of a mountain, and then halfway back up another mountain.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen. Something took that kid and carried him to where he was found. I believe it could have been a human. It could have been a creature. Maybe he walked through a portal. That's another theory that you hear bandied about, is because some of the people that have survived and came back said suddenly they realized they weren't on a trail. They didn't know where they were.
Yeah.
Nothing looked familiar. And there's even been people that could hear search and rescue teams calling for them, and they would call back, but it was like the searchers couldn't hear them. And there was one lady who even saw the searchers off in the distance, and she's like, I'm jumping and I'm yelling and I'm waving my arms, and they just walked right on past me. I think she was injured or something and couldn't catch up with them.
Timothy Renner had a story walking through one of the areas he hiked all the time where it seemed like they were completely lost in it.
Mm-hmm.
And they did eventually get out, obviously, but he said, it was a very weird, it's called Phaled, where things tend to be not where they're supposed to be. He's like, suddenly we were like, where are we? And they kept walking, and eventually things started to look familiar again, but like there was nowhere that they could have been off trail,
Yeah. I've had that happen in the Smokies. I walked into places that didn't look familiar, and I just kept walking, until I got back to something that did look familiar. And one time I was up on, I'm trying to remember where the overlook is up there, Klingman's Dome. It's the highest point in the Smokies. And they've got an overlook up there that you don't climb up to it, but it's got this long, slow, looping concrete path that goes up to the tower. And I'd been up to Klingman's Dome one afternoon and was on my way back out, and I was just going through the woods. I was off trail because it gets a lot of hikers and a lot of tourist traffic and stuff, so I was just picking my own route. And I came across like this, I think it was an oak tree, maybe a beech tree, some kind of huge tree. And there's not really, there's some red oaks up at that level, because they're pretty high up in the mountains there. And there's not really oak trees, and there's not any giant ones. So I had this tree, it looked so real as to be unreal. It looked like Disney Imagineers had made this tree and put it in the forest, and the sun was shining on it, and it was in this little clearing. And I walked into the clearing, and I'm standing there looking at it, and I'm just like, in awe of this, and like, why have I never seen this before? I've never noticed this. And then all of a sudden I'm thinking like, that would be a good place to, if I just sat down there at the base of that tree and leaned back, maybe even take a nap, that would be so cool. And then all of a sudden I'm like, where did that thought even come from? It's late afternoon. It's going to be dark soon. The mist from the Smokies, that's why they get the name. There's a mist that comes up out of the trees there. I was like, I've got to get out of here. I'm going to be in the middle of the woods in the dark in someplace I don't recognize. But I think if I'd listened to whatever that was trying to lull me into this false sense of security and how neat it would be to take a nap under this tree, I think I would have been one of those missing people, or at least like Rip Van Winkle or something. I'd show up 20 years later with my beard down to my knees to know where everybody's at. But that's another theory about the disappearances in general. You talk in Phaled, there's all kinds of legends in the Smokies of fairy lights or spook lights, as they tend to call them up there, that will either lead you to safety or they've led other people even farther into the woods and gotten them even more lost. And Gemma Jade, our head writer over on Missing Persons and Mysteries YouTube channel, she's written a book called Misisng, the Fae Theory, where she goes into all these stories of people that may or may not have been taken by the Fae, the fairy folk. And that would tie up a lot of things too, because if you look at it from a historical standpoint, there's, especially in some of the Celtic regions where the Fae were almost a religion, they talked of some of the Fae being like hairy giants. And then there are also the Fae that appeared to people in a horseless buggy that came out of the sky. Well, that's UFOs and Bigfoot right there.
Well, it's just our term for the same thing.
Yeah. So maybe it's all the Fae. That's something to think about.
Or the Fae is just that culture's term for the same thing we're experiencing. None of us are seeing it for what it is.
Yeah. And that's one of the things about the fairies. They don't like the color red. Supposedly that pisses them off. And also, a lot of people have gone missing either in a berry patch or near a berry patch or while they were picking berries. And that's another thing. The Fae consider that an insult for you to be in their berry patch. Not only is it their food, but it's also places where they meet for their frolicking and mating and things like that are in berry patches. So those Fae stories, like I said, they go back to I've seen stuff from like the 1600s in Ireland and places like that, those stories, and talk about people being taken by the Fae and then eventually they come back, or sometimes they were never seen again. And so it's something that's been going on for a long time. It's just we're looking at it with through a more modern lens, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not the Fae either.
Yeah, well, true. I mean, it is what it is. I think it's just that each culture has its own terminology and sort of camouflage we put on it.
Yeah, indeed.
With the bad weather thing, I mean, we also have to consider that bad weather is going to impair any kind of search effort. So it seems like if we have bad weather, it's also going to make it harder to find the person.
Mm-hmm. And that's another part of the Fae theory. Supposedly they can control the weather or have effect on it. Another odd thing that I found is the people that are missing shoes. I read about a case the other day where a guy was with a hunting party, and they had a mule with him, and the mule had spooked, and they lost part of their gear. And among the gear that got lost was this guy's sleeping bag. Well, a few miles away was another lodge that they used every year at a different time, and they had some equipment stored there. And he's like, you guys go on ahead. I'm going to hike up this fork to the other place, get my sleeping bag, and then I'll come back. Well, he didn't show up in a day or two. They went looking for him. At that time, never found him. They reported him as missing. They found him sometime later, and he had a GPS with him and everything. He had gone past the fork that he knew to take to get to the other place. They hunted this area every year, and then at some point had taken his boots off and placed them side by side on the ground, and then continued on barefoot for several miles. But the really strange part about this was it was below freezing temperatures and in a foot or more of snow. And then when they finally did find him, he had sat down under a tree and poured himself like a cup full of energy. He had a coffee cup full of energy drink, an open bottle of energy drink there. And he'd sat down under a tree and died, presumably from hypothermia, within an occupied and working ranch, within sight of it, and only a short distance off the main road through the area.
Huh.
So you have to wonder, what happened here? Why did he not go to the ranch? Why did he not go to the road and try to flag somebody down?
Yeah.
And why did he take his boots off to walk through the snow? That's just incomprehensible. So they talk about the paradoxical undressing, where when you're already suffering from hypothermia, your body's losing heat so fast to try to keep the core warm that you feel like you're burning up and you'll disrobe. But
that does not sound like a case of that.
No, it doesn't have the hallmarks of the hypothermia type undressing. So again, just weird stuff out there, and it seems to be and then all states to some degree. Like I said, down the middle of the map there's not too many, but
it doesn't.
A lot of missing. Go ahead.
Oh, it doesn't take a large drop in body temperature to hit hypothermia. That's the other thing. I don't think people realize that.
No, it can happen in the summertime.
Yeah.
You get rained on, and then after it gets dark, so if there's any wind or anything, you can get hypothermia real easy even in warmer weather if it's just a little cool out. And then if you get wet, the wind will wick the water on like that, and it'll zap the heat right out of your body.
Because I think it's 95 degrees. If your body drops to 95 degrees, I think that's considered hypothermia.
Yeah. So that's what, like a little over 2.5 degree drop. And I run low temp anywhere. I usually run around 97.
Me too.
So two degrees and I'm a goner.
In fact, I think I checked it earlier just for the hell of it. And I think I was 96.7.
Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I run very cold.
Yeah, same.
I have heard that, because what is it, 97.8 or something is the standard? What's the normal?
It used to be 98.6, but I've read recently that they've rethought that, and it's a different number now.
They're finding a lot of people run lower than that is what they're finding.
Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to talk about was Ed McKinley, because I think this connects into the this whole mystery too, in the way that like he was one of these missing people that just disappeared, but we know what happened, and it comes together in a very strange way. Yeah,
it just took decades to solve it. Basically, he lived near the Smokies in the Blount County, Tennessee area near Maryville. This is 1915. He was 12 years old and had a fight with his father, and he decided to show his father what a tough kid he was. He was going to walk all the way to his grandparents' house, which I guess he didn't really realize or think about the distance. It was all the way on the other side of the Great Smoky Mountains in North Carolina. So he would have walked along what's now US 441 through the Smokies, which at that time is more or less a wagon trail. But even in modern times, they close that road a lot because of snow and inclement weather and stuff. So trying to remember what time of year he started out. I think it was in the fall, and he made it quite a ways. He made it into the Smokies, which just that walk alone was something, but he hadn't counted on not being able to get there due to the weather, and eventually laid down and died under a little rock overhang. Well, farmers or hunters headed back into Cades Cove, discovered the body, and took him back there to the cove, and nobody knew who he was. Nobody claimed a body. Of course, back then, Blount County, Maryville, that area, today it doesn't seem that far from Cades Cove, but we're talking, 20, 30 miles or something like that. Back then, the communities wouldn't have been very connected. So
right.
A body found in one area wouldn't necessarily hear about it. And as far as I know, his parents never reported him missing. They just assumed that he took off somewhere and never came back. But they had a burial for him. The community there chipped in together and bought him a clean shirt and a new pair of overalls, I think it was. And they had a burial for him, and just had here lies we don't know who on the tombstone. And it stayed a mystery until I think sometime in the 70s, about 50 or 60 years. And there was a lady that just happened to come into the visitor center, and she was inquiring about bodies that had been found there in the past. Her little brother had gone, or her older brother had gone missing when she was a little girl. And that was the last thing that she knew about him, was that he was going to walk through the Smokies and go to the grandparents in North Carolina. And one of the park rangers that just happened to be there that day was familiar with that story of the body that was found and buried there in Cades Cove, and called one of the Ogle family. They're one of the founding members of that area. They lived in Cades Cove and in Gatlinburg, places there. Their original cabin used to be on display there in Gatlinburg. I don't know if it's still there or not, but called one of the Ogles, the matriarchs that was still living, and she knew enough of the story to tell it to the lady. And just from hearing, and she'd seen the body
Mm-hmm.
She was that old. And when she was a little girl, and just the way she described what he looked like and things, the woman realized that this was her little brother. And it turned out his name was Ed McKinley. And that was what had happened to him. They got together. Glenn Cardwell was the ranger, park ranger, that had helped piece all this together. And, took 2 or 3 different people, but they finally found out who he was, and they've got a new headstone with his actual name on it and replaced the one that here lies an unknown child. But yeah, it took 50, 60 years anyway to solve that.
How did they know he was going to his grandparents?
That's what he told his parents, that, he was mad, so I'm just going to go live with my grandparents. And they're like, go ahead.
Oh,
they thought he'd turn around and come back, and just never heard from him again. And back then, 12 was probably like being 18 or something. Now there were 12-year-old kids that went to work, or that left the home place to go and try to find a job and things like that.
True.
The school wasn't mandatory. You could go to a big city and find work, things like that. And they just probably didn't care too much about him anyway. Back then, the hard scrabble, maybe they had several other kids, and apparently he was giving them a problem over something anyway. I think it was over chores or something. And they're just like, well, let's mouth to feed, as heartless as that sounds.
Yeah.
But they never bothered to go looking for him or even report him missing, other than as far as is known outside their local community, if even that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just one of those where, one family, the lady knew, when my brother went missing, we never found him. And then this other community, well, we found this kid 40, 50, 60 years ago. We don't know who he is. Nobody ever claimed the body.
Right.
So really 2 mysteries solved there.
Yeah. And like I said, the interesting thing is he becomes one of those weird disappearances until we have that last piece of info that someone did find him, and they just didn't make the connection.
And it wasn't really that weird at all. He simply froze to death because he wasn't prepared. But I think the most amazing part is that he made it from Blount County, the Maryville area, all the way up into that area, the Smokies, beyond Cades Cove, in the wintertime.
Yeah.
On foot.
Huh. And I think with some of these missing persons cases, it's just that. We're missing some vital piece of information that makes it go from strange to not so strange. And others are just plain strange. I mean, no matter how much info we have.
Yeah, indeed. And then I think there are some people that want to go missing, that don't, where they just want to turn their back on society, or where they go out there to end their life. But the thing that even gets me about those is there's been cases where, say somebody, they've watched them pull into the trailhead, go into the woods, they never came back out. And then if they were suicidal, how could you get in and get in someplace that no one could ever find your body? That would be the magic trick right there. Is you would have to have someplace picked out to go and know that it was somewhere where you'd never be found.
And
not leave any forensic evidence or anything behind. Now, there are plenty of suicides they find, where somebody has ended their life, but again, they're found where they've either jumped off of something, or they've shot themselves, or they've overdosed. And note or not, it was kind of clear what they intended to do there. But then other people, who knows if that's really what they did, or where's the body? Corpus delicti, show me the body.
The one of the book in the Strawman trilogy that Michael Marshall Smith wrote starts with a guy who is going to kill himself he just has an entire bag full of vodka. And he just starts walking out into the woods, I think in the Pacific Northwest. And his goal, and it's winter, his goal is just to get as deep in as he can and then just drink himself until he's numb and then die of hypothermia. Mm. And then it takes a twist because he encounters Bigfoot, and then he must get out. Then he's desperate to get out of there and tell people that he just saw Bigfoot. So, It
kind of reminds me of those. I remember watching some movie years and years ago where a guy wanted to end it all, but he didn't have the guts to do it himself, so he hired a hitman.
Oh, yeah.
Well, before the hitman can do the job, he meets this woman, falls in love, and decides he doesn't want to die. So now he's on the run from this guy that he's hired to kill him.
Yes. What movie was that? I've seen that.
It was something about the Three Roses or something like that, and that was how the hitman let him know that if he was going to take the job or not. He said, "I'll put an ad in the classified that says something about send 3 roses or something like that, something to do with the roses." But there may have been other movies with the same plot. So that on HBO probably sometime in the 80s. But it was a nice little twist there, the way they did it.
Someone out there listening right now knows.
Yeah, indeed. There's some real movie trivia buffs out there. But another thing, there are people that want to go missing that are found alive and just chose to do something else. There was a lady that they found in Zion out in Utah. I think it was Zion, somewhere in Utah. She'd been missing since last year, several months. At the time, it had been several months, and they were still searching for what they thought would be remains. Search and rescue turned into search and recovery, and a couple of park employees were out flying a drone over an area where they thought they might find her, and the drone crashed. And when they were hiking up the hill to look for the drone, they found a well-concealed tent, and the lady popped her head out, and it was the woman that they'd been looking for months.
Wow. And
just, you consider everything that was going on in 2020 with the protests and the elections and the COVID and all that going on. She's just like, I'm out. I'm going to go live in a tent in the woods. And she foraged for food. And then a lot of times, apparently, when people camp, if they don't use up what they bring with them, they'll leave it behind or put it in the trash, or in some cases, I think she actually asked for food, but people helped her out and stuff. It was like 5 or 6 months that she lived in a tent in the middle of, I'm pretty sure it was Zion.
You have one in this book about the guy who his car was found at the edge of the Smoky Mountain Park, and he just left a note in there that said, "Don't look for me."
Yeah, that's I can't think of the guy's name. I mean. Through Derek, that's one of the more recent ones in the Smokies, and he didn't really appear suicidal, but they thought he might have. He had spent the night in a hotel in, I think Cherokee, over on the North Carolina side, anyway. And in the room, his father said that he had a Bible and a bottle of liquor prominently displayed on the bed, like he was trying to make a choice. And they found his car at the trailhead there, and a note, "Don't look for me." Well, that's that could have been just like "Don't tow my car. I'm in here. I'll be back." But it was kind of strange, just kind of cryptically worded like that.
Yeah.
But he was one of the ones they never found any trace of him, never found a body, and even more strange, they never really could prove that he was in the park, other than at the parking lot of the trailhead. None of the other hikers that were in there that day saw anybody that looked like him. So there was conjecture that he may have been abducted out of the parking lot or had somebody meet him there.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I mean, with that note, maybe he decided, "I'm done. I'm going to start a new life," and he had someone he was going to do it with. And
yeah, that's kind of what I believe happened with another disappearance there that happened back in, I think it's 1980. Thelma Pauline Melton, her and her husband, who was a much older man, had been coming there and camping at the Dudley Creek campground for years. They had an Airstream trailer there that they would stay in. And she knew several other ladies that were doing the same thing with their families, and she even volunteered at the senior center there in the eastern part of Gatlinburg, that area up there. And one day she was out hiking with her friends, and she walked ahead of them on the trail, and that was the last time she was ever seen. But the only thing missing was what she had with her, which was cigarettes and a lighter. She didn't take her purse or any medication or anything with her. But there was conjecture on that one that said her husband was about 20 years older than her, and she was, I think, in her 60s at the time or close to it. So he was getting frail and required a lot of care. And some people think that she may have just, hey, I don't want to do this anymore.
Right.
And there were rumors of a boyfriend that had picked her up at the park entrance. She had used the telephone at the senior center the day before, something she'd never been known to do, and then disappeared the next day. And I think that was one of the ones where somebody had cashed a check with her name on it, like shortly after she disappeared, but then that was the last she was ever heard of. Of course, back then in Tennessee, driver's license were just typed on green paper. There was no photo ID or anything like that. It was really easy to forge a license or to borrow somebody's license. Happened all the time. The drinking age, I graduated in 1981. I'm going to tell on myself here a little bit. The drinking age in Tennessee at that time was 18 years old. And there were people that went to high school where I did that were already 18 years old. And that was a very popular pastime, was renting your driver's license out to people that wanted to go either buy alcohol or adult magazines.
Right, yeah.
So back then it would have been a lot easier. You didn't have a paper trail, and like you do now, it would be almost impossible now to. Although I've heard that there are places where you can get a fake ID, fake passport, fake whatever you want, but you have to pay a little more for it, and it's probably a lot easier seen through than it would back then. But yeah, literally, my first driver's license. It was a green piece of paper, stiff paper. They rolled it in a typewriter, typed your information on there, folded it in half, and handed it to you. And there's your driver's license.
Huh. I never knew that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, those were wild times back then. And then they raised the drinking age to 19. I just turned 19. And then the next time they raised it was to 21. Right after I turned 21. So I was legal from the time I was 18 and well into college. So like I said, to a lot of people, it didn't matter. You could find somebody that would buy alcohol for you, or you could just borrow a driver's license.
Did they even really enforce it that much?
Nah. But one thing, if you borrowed somebody's license, you needed to memorize the info on there, because sometimes the clerks, just figuring you were full of bull.
Right.
But okay, where you live? What's your middle name? How much do you weigh? Are you sure you have brown hair and green eyes? So you at least had to kind of find somebody that looked a little like you, and somebody with an easy name. And I hope he's not listening, because this would probably embarrass him, but one guy I went to school, his name was Brian Johnson. That's just, it's just such a common name. There could be any number. So that's easy to remember. Oh, I'm Brian Johnson. And you still at least had to memorize the address.
And there was one other missing person story I remember from your book, which was the one where it was a younger girl, and she disappeared just after walking over the lip of the trail.
Trini Gibson.
Yeah.
Trini Gibson. And there's a lot of odd coincidences and kind of synchronicities with that. She lived in the same Bearden area. That's a community in Knoxville. Bearden High School is there in Bearden Middle School. That's the same area that Dennis Martin was from, and she disappeared not quite 10 years later. I think she disappeared in, I want to say, 76 or 77. She actually worked in, there was a cafeteria in Westtown Mall called Morrison's, and my parents and I used to go there and eat a lot. They liked the food, and I remember her carrying our trays to the table sometimes. And but yeah, she was I think she was a sophomore, either sophomore or junior at Bearden High School when she disappeared. It was a surprise field trip. The biology teacher had loaded the kids. They knew they were going on a field trip, but they didn't know where they were going until they were already en route. And then he announced, we're going to the Smokies. We're going to go up to Klingman's Dome, the place that I talked about there. And then there was another place that they went to as well. And there was a guy that she had hiked with. And in fact, since they didn't know where they were going, it was in October, she hadn't dressed for the mountains. And one of her classmates, she had borrowed his coat, which she was wearing when she disappeared. They never found that. And she'd hiked with several different groups of people. She'd had lunch with the guy that she'd borrowed the coat from, and then on the way back toward, it was in the afternoon at that point, and they were headed back to the parking lot. I think they had to be on the bus by 3. She had walked with a group of people and then walked on ahead of them. They claim that they saw her stop on the trail and look off into the woods and kind of squat down like she was seeing something off in the bush. She stepped off the trail and literally into the pages of Smoky Mountain history and lore, never seen again. Later on, when they were searching for the girls that had seen her step off the trail, took the authorities back to where she disappeared from. The only thing they found there was some cigarette butts and an unfinished can of beer. Like maybe there was somebody waiting there for her. And the cigarette butts matched some that they also found in the parking lot. And I'm often curious if they took all that into evidence. I would love for them to do DNA on that. They didn't have DNA at the time.
Yeah.
But there's a woman on the internet has a website. It's oddly named. It's Canadian Girl GURL 77, and she has made the study of Trini's case like her life's work, even to the point she's got some of the reports and things that she had to FOIA to get copies of. She has copies of the yearbooks and things from the year Trini disappeared. She's been in touch with her classmates, and she knows a lot more than she can tell. She said she'd actually received death threats from some of the people involved who she considers suspects. Huh. But there was a classmate of hers that was infatuated with Trini, and he had even come and tried to break into her bedroom one night, and Trini's mom shot him in the foot. Well, he had been in, now this is Tennessee.
Yeah.
Even though it's a nice area in Tennessee. But he had been in like a juvenile detention center over that little incident and had just gotten out, I think the day before, just shortly before this field trip. Well, some of the people on the bus claimed that his car followed the bus up to the mountains. But then the principal at Bearden High School swore that the kid was in school that day and he saw him several times throughout the day.
Yeah.
So who knows? I mean, it's one of those things. There was a lot of stories. There was a lot of, but apparently, according to, I can't think of the lady's name, the Canadian girl. Can't think of her first name. But anyway, I had her on my Campfire Stories show one time. She talked a lot about it. She thinks she knows who's done it. Who did it. He's very connected. His father's an attorney, a high-powered attorney in Knoxville. And she had some of Trini's classmates tell her that Trini never left the park alive. Apparently, it was like an open secret that a lot of the classmates knew what happened. Destroyed the whole family, naturally.
Yeah.
Turned out my niece was friends with Trini's younger sister, Tina. And I was talking about disappearance in the Smokies. She's like, oh, my friend's sister went missing. And I'm like, who's your friend? She's like, Trini Gibson. And I'm like, what? So I arranged to meet her sister and talk with her and got some real inside information there. It's just really sad because the parents ended up in divorce. A lot of crap was heaped on Tina, being the younger sister, and she had an older brother that had just come home from the Navy right when it happened, too. Oh. There was even people that cast some suspicions on him for a while. But she said, that when her parents would get mad at her, they'd say things like, you're the one that should have disappeared, and just, really hateful stuff like that to hear from your parents. And she ended up getting into drugs and alcohol, drank herself to death. Basically, she passed away a few years ago. But she told me, she said, in my mind's eye, she said, I like to think that Trini ran off with a boy, and that he met her in the parking lot, and she just wanted to get away from my parents. Didn't want to, finish her senior year the next year at school. She just wanted to get away. And I like to think she's on a beach somewhere in sunny Southern California with a new name and a new life, and she's happy. Yeah. She said, but, Steve, in my heart of hearts, I don't think she ever left that mountain alive. So, sad situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And from the sounds of it, more likely to be a person than anything really weird.
Yeah. But again, there was no real evidence other than a beer can and some cigarette butts, which is not really anything at all. No. But and I'd asked Canadian girl, I can't remember her name. She's going to kill me if she's listening to this. if they still had that in evidence, and she was going to check and see if she could get a hold of somebody to find out if they still had that stuff in evidence somewhere, and if it had been tested or was planning to be tested for DNA, which could at least show who was hiding in the woods smoking cigarettes and drinking a beer. But then again, it was a bunch of high school kids on a trip. Could have been anybody. Said when I was a kid, I knew people that kept a flask in their locker. So there was teenage drinkers even back then, especially back then.
Yes.
But,
I pulled up her website, but it doesn't have her name on it.
Yeah. It's like Laura or Lauren or something like that. And I apologize if you're listening for not remembering your name. But that's her website. She's got a lot of fascinating stuff on there. Like I said, she's made it pretty much her life's work. She's very well-versed on the Dennis Martin case, too. But Trini Gibson, I think she said she came across it by accident, and it just spoke to her somehow, and she felt she needed to do this for Trini. It was like Trini was calling out to her from beyond and willing her to do this.
Interesting.
But you can spend a lot of time on that website, and that's a deep rabbit hole, and just one of those unsolved mysteries. It's like her graduating class. It was kind of an open secret with them. They all supposedly know who did it, but they can't say anything about it.
And again, it's one of those things where when you look at it initially, it looks like something supernatural happened, but the more information you put together, the less supernatural it appears.
It's human something or other there, murder or whatever you want to call it. But just from talking to people that knew her and stuff, I can't imagine why anybody would want to kill her. But there was also reports of her comb, and back in the 70s, it was popular for kids to carry these big plastic combs in your back pocket of your jeans. And they're expensive. They're like $7 or $8 or something, which was a lot of money back then. Well, her comb was found on the dashboard of the car of the guy that she'd borrowed the coat from. And then there was also some of the girls at school that were spotted wearing some of her jewelry. Supposedly. So the more you look into it, the more it looks like a murder, but the whodunit part with the main suspect being sort of protected and then other people calling in death threats to somebody. That's who. Of course, there is no statute of limitations on murder, so I can understand. But it reminds me, recently I heard of someone who was doing some research into the Lincoln assassination, Abraham Lincoln, and started receiving death threats.
Really?
Now that's one hell of a cover-up if somebody's still trying to protect somebody from the Lincoln assassination.
Well, if I remember right, the Lincoln assassination, he wasn't working alone.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like there's much doubt about what happened, but that he may have met up with others who were part of a conspiracy to take Lincoln out.
Yeah, and then was he really killed in the barn fire, or did he get away? And
right.
There's been people like back in I guess it would have been like back in the late 1800s, maybe the early 1900s. There was people that would travel around and claim to be John Wilkes Booth. They would appear in these little theaters in small towns and give a talk. My dad talked about when he was in high school, there was a guy that came to their school once, charged like a nickel a ticket to get into the auditorium, and he claimed he was Jesse James. And just all sorts of stuff like that. Back then there was no way to really verify who anybody was. If they looked like the tintype photograph, well, there you go. You look like Jesse James. There's a career for you.
You talk about freak storms in this area too.
Mm-hmm. The Smokies. That's one of the ways they got their name. There's a mist that comes up off of the mountains. It's like a dense fog. I've been up on Clingman's Dome, like I said, the highest point of the Smokies, and watched it roll up the mountainside. And one of the interesting things I found out, there's a chapter in the book called the kind of tongue-in-cheek, the Great Smokies Triangle. I've got a question mark there. Everybody tells you to be careful of the bears and stay away from the bears when you go in the Smokies. Now, there are a lot of black bear there, and they can mess with you. They like to come into town and go through the garbage. There's videos on YouTube bear strolling around in downtown Gatlinburg, which is the resort town there just before you go into the Smoky Mountains National Park. But since the inception of the park in 1934, there's only been 5 fatal bear attacks in ever how many number of years that is. But in that same amount of time, there's been over 50 plane crashes. So
yeah, let's save the plane crashes for the Patreon segment because we're almost out of time.
Okay.
But get into some of the weird weather stuff. Like you said, there was one storm that came out of nowhere and killed a bunch of people.
Yeah, I think that was due to lightning or something there, but it was on days when no severe weather was predicted. And other people I've heard talk about, they were climbing in the Smokies. They'd be inching their way along a rock face or something, clinging with their toes and their fingertips. And suddenly these really strong winds will spring up out of nowhere like it's trying to blow you off the mountain. I've heard stories about small clouds that would pop up and appear to follow people through certain areas. But the weather anomalies, it's usually like a heavy rain. That happened after Dennis Martin disappeared. I think there was maybe snow after Trini went missing. That was in October, but they do get snow up there. And it's like the weather or whatever, something controlling the weather is in cahoots with whatever's taking people in some cases, because if there's rain or snow or anything like that, that's going to hamper a search effort. Tracker dogs, scent dogs won't be able to do their job. Snow, you would think, well, you could follow their tracks in the snow, but they get so much up there that unless you're right behind them, the falling snow is going to cover up any existing tracks in the snow that was already there. So it's a weird area. I mean, like I said, the Cherokee, they have a lot of legends there. There's certain areas that they avoid altogether. They have stories of little people. They have stories of hairy giants. There's one legend about Fontana Lake that the Cherokee have about a deer that waded out just into the shallow area and was drinking water, and something started in the lake, started swirling, sucked the deer down, and then there were like gobs of fur and blood churning up out of the lake, and something in the lake ate the deer, and then if you get in the lake, it'll eat you too.
Huh. Well, I definitely want to talk to you more about the Cherokee legends, but again, we're almost out of time, so we can do that on a Patreon segment. But you have a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, I do. I'm all over the place. I have been for the past couple of years or so.
And
I've got.
Yeah, so
go ahead.
I was going to just say, go ahead and tell people about your podcast, the books, everything.
Okay, the books, you can find them on Amazon or wherever fine books are sold, as my publisher likes for me to say. They're available in ebook and paperback format. I've also heard that they're in some regular stores and things. Somebody in Florida had seen the Great Smokies book in a Target store. So I'm holding out for Piggly Wiggly before I go anywhere to do a book signing. But I'm on YouTube. I have my personal channel, 13 Past Midnight, where I'm on a marathon run over there doing ghost stories at midnight, where my co-host, Sandy from the 9 Lives of Sandy channel, we go on, talk for an hour or two, and then we play pre-recorded ghost stories from LibriVox.com overnights. Ghost stories from around the turn of the last century that are in the public domain. So hear us talk for a while and then listen to 8 or 9 hours of ghost stories. A lot of fun. Tonight, as of this recording, it'll be night number 287 in a row. Trying for at least a year before I do something different. And then my main channel, which is new since I was on here last, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, I'd done a thing about the Smokies and those missing cases that I've just talked about on my 13 Past Midnight channel. Well, in the comments, there was somebody like, hey, I've got a missing person channel. I'd like for you to come and narrate for me. And I thought, okay, I'll go look. So I get that a lot, and you go look, and it's, somebody with a couple hundred subscribers or something that's, not necessarily going to be worth the time or effort. But at the time, this guy had 10,000 subs, and I'm like, wow, that's a lot, because I only had 1,000, 1,200 or something.
Yeah.
Well, for whatever reason, people like the way I tell stories and the voice that I do my narrating with. I've got so many compliments on it, but it just took off. And just yesterday, we passed 126,000 subscribers.
Nice.
That's Missing Persons and Mysteries. We have a lot of fun over there, and there's some serious business too. The main focus will always be missing persons. If we can help one missing person make their way home, or one family find closure that's lost a person, then we're doing our job. But now the mysteries side of that, missing persons and mysteries, we take a little more leeway with the mysteries. We cover unsolved murders. Sometimes we'll have just creepy stories in general. But like I said, we found a lot of these missing person cases, they will have a supernatural element. Not all of them, but enough to justify the mystery side of it.
Nice. All right. And didn't you also tell me there's a band that you're going to be doing some narration for?
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. They had a guy in Sweden reach out to me. He's the leader of a symphonic death metal band, and they've got a new double album coming out, and they wanted me to do a narration on a couple of tracks. And it was between me and I don't know if you're familiar with a band called Marillion. They're an old band.
I love some Marillion.
It was between me and Fish from Marillion, if you know who Fish is.
Yes.
And they picked me. I was probably the cheapest and the most open to doing it. I don't know what the circumstances were, but it was down to those two. They picked me. That's going to be coming out sometime soon. I don't know if I can say the name of the band or not. This is kind of under wraps. They haven't made an official announcement.
Okay.
They've announced some of the other stuff going on with it, but I'll let you know as soon as I can say something about it. And you're familiar with the band. You've actually played some of their songs on The Last Days of the Lost.
Yeah,
so.
I like them. I didn't recognize the name initially because it's not a name that super sticks out. But I did a quick search on my computer. I'm like, oh, I have 2 songs from them, and I liked both of them. All right.
Awesome. Well, yeah, they've got a double album coming out very, very soon. I've got the demo tracks that I'm going to be narrating, or demos of the tracks that I'm going to be narrating on.
Nice.
We're still deciding what to put on there. They wanted to know if I wanted to write something, or the subject of the album is limbo, like being in limbo, like somewhere between heaven and hell. And they're going to come up with something. I'm going to write something. Actually, I've got a poet friend in Seattle helping me come up with some lines, and then we're going to get together and kind of compare notes, and they're going to decide what they want me to do on the album. So
very cool.
Yeah.
And yes, for the record, Misplaced Childhood from Marillion is one of my all-time favorite records.
Awesome. Yeah, I knew they were kind of an older band, like Hawkwind and in that era. I didn't know if a lot of
late 70s. I mean, they went pretty strong to the mid 90s. I saw them play in Syracuse. Actually, the place was packed to the rafters.
Yeah, but that's what, almost 25 years ago or something. Now, hard to believe. Jesus, it's my daughter, born 1990, turned 31 this year. Like, that's not possible. I'm not much older than that myself. Doesn't feel like it, but yeah, I didn't know they were. Like I said, I listened to some of their stuff from the 70s around the Marillion and Hawkwind and some of those. Status Quo. There were good bands out of that era, but I didn't know any of them still doing anything. Yeah,
I don't know if Marillion still does anything. Fish, I think, is doing something still.
Yeah.
So
apparently I'm in good company then.
Yes, you are.
If I beat Fish out to the narration.
That's kind of awesome. All right. Do you have a website or anything?
No, I've just never bothered to set one up. That's probably something that will happen at one point or another. I'm on Facebook, Steve Stockton 81. That's the number 8 and the number 1. And I'm on Twitter at Strange and Odd. And you can get a hold of me. Either those my email addresses in the books or on the YouTube channel. Come check it out. Leave me a comment. If you want to get in touch with me, let me know, and I'll find you.
All right. Awesome. Well, we'll do a Patreon segment and talk about some of this other stuff we didn't get to, but thank you for joining me for this.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
This show would not be possible without the help of our Patreons. And a special thanks to those of you pledging $10 or more: Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Andrew Nichols, Matthew Sproul, The 100th Monkey Project, A Blue Second Generation MR2 Drifting Around a Japanese Mountain, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, Christopher Ernst, Craig Cisternos, Craig Parmenter, Crystal Ann Compton, David Moore, Denise Sarek, Diane B., Diona Bidwell, Dominic O'Malley, Duffy Dowder, Edu Camahort, MTK, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, J. Otto Bullitt, Joanna Rojas, John W. Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Kristen L., Linz Jackson K., Luke Osborne, Mark Brady, Matt in Delaware, Patricia W., Paul Jeffries, Ray Benedetto, Riker and Stark, Roger Gonzalez, Sam Sharon, Sedgder, Stone Wilderness, Taylor Bell, Thunderboy, Tyler H. Glimstead, Vincent Treewell, Walker, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Ren Collier, Martina Saint, and Stephen D. Thank you all so very, very much. If you enjoyed that, there's plenty more in a Patreon segment with Steve. Become a patron at wheretheroadgo.com. It's only $3 a month. You get extra stuff pretty much every week. Plus, you get the shows a week early. So, yeah, and the occasional extra gift and such. So it helps us out a lot. So does sharing and rating the show on your favorite pod-catching service. Yeah, share it because it helps us a lot. And give us a good rating. We really, really appreciate it. And it helps everyone on the show. The more exposure, the better. And with that, I will see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.